Hello everybody. We're going to discuss the ACT English test. We're going to go over passage 1, this passage 1 here, and the first, I believe it's 15 questions in this video, and then we'll go over passage 2 in the next set of questions in the next video. I'm not going to overwhelm you with everything all at once, right? So we're gonna break it down, and we're going to talk about this ACT test. So it's always best to read the directions, but having read a practice test, you can read these directions more quickly when you take the actual test. So I'll just read them out loud. Directions: in the 5 passages that follow, certain words and phrases are underlined and numbered. In the right-hand column, you will find alternatives for the underlined part. In most cases, you are to choose the one that best represents the idea, makes the statement appropriate for standard written English, or is worded most consistently with the style and tone of the passage as a whole. If you think the original version is best, you choose no change. In some cases, you will find in the right-hand column a question about the underlined part. You are to choose the best answer to the question. Just see, they say the best answer because they're kind of tricky, and at some points they'll have like A and C are both good answers, and you have to find which one is better. You will also find questions about a section of the passage or about the passage as a whole. These questions do not refer to an underlined portion of the passage, but rather are identified by a number or numbers in a box. For each question, choose the alternative you consider best and fill in the corresponding oval on your answer document. Read each passage through once before you begin to answer the questions that accompany it. For many of the questions, you must read several sentences beyond the question to determine the answer. Be sure that you have read far enough ahead each time you choose an alternative. Okay, so we're going to start with passage 1. What elephants learned. Cynthia Moss has been studying elephants since 1972, when she started the now famous Amboseli Elephant Research Project in Amboseli National Park in Kenya. All right, we had 2 underlined parts, so let's go check the questions. 1 is, see, elephants has a comma after it right here. Cynthia Moss has been studying elephants. Now, a comma, the way I like to think of commas is that if you're reading it out loud, it should make you pause. So if I'm saying, my name is John Swoboda, comma, and I like pottery, like there's a reason for the comma, so I can pause. Do you need to pause here? Cynthia Moss has been studying elephants since 1972. Yeah, no, there's no need to pause. So we're going to get rid of the comma, which option has no comma. C and D both have no comma, but D has an apostrophe after the elephants, which would make it a possessive, which would mean that the elephants should be owning something in the sentence, and they're not. They are the object of the sentence. They are what's being studied. So we don't need an apostrophe. So we're going to go with C. Okay, and now I'm going to check this over here. Question 1, the best answer is C, because a comma is appropriate between the noun 1970. Wait, what? Oh, because they put a comma after 1972. I didn't even realize that. Because a comma is appropriate between the noun 1972 and the dependent relative clause that begins with the word when. The best answer is not A, because the comma incorrectly separates the adverbial phrase since 1972 from the main clause, and the verb phrase it modifies has been studying. So if we look back, Cynthia Moss has been studying elephants. Boy, they're using a lot of advanced English words here. Because the comma incorrectly separates the adverbial phrase since 1972. Since is an adverb. So since 1972 is an adverbial phrase. And yeah, like I said, it causes a pause between those two things, and there doesn't need to be a pause. B was elephants, comma, since 1972, comma. Because The phrase 1972 is essential to the meaning of the main clause, restrictive. Setting the phrase off with commas indicates the phrase is non-restrictive, resulting in an ungrammatical sentence. So if we put a comma before and after since 1972, that means that it's an unnecessary phrase, that it's just sort of like adding flavor, and you can get rid of it and the sentence would still make sense. But that's not true. You need the phrase since 1972 for the sentence to make sense. And it's not D because the context of the sentence requires the word elephants and the main clause to be plural and non-possessive, but not plural possessive. Right, like I was saying, this one makes the elephants. I'm not sure this is helpful. I'm just going to try to explain it the best I can, because they are kind of overcomplicating it, I think. Let's look at question 2. When she started the now famous Amboseli Elephant Research Project in Amboseli National Park in Kenya. So they're looking at the phrase now famous, and we can leave it exactly as it is. We can change it to more than famous. We can change it to now famously, or we can change it to famously. When she started now, if you don't know, a good thing to do is sort of in your head, get rid of this phrase and replace it with these other phrases and see which one works best. So, when she started the now famous Amboseli Elephant Research Project. When she started the more than famous Amboseli Research Project. Is it even possible to be more than famous? You're either famous or not famous. More than famous doesn't make sense. When she started the now famously Amboseli, no. When she started the famously, no. Because famously describes a verb. You can do something famously, but you can't be famously. You have to be famous. So, now famous, I've said famous so many times it's losing its meaning. Right, so we're going to say no change. We're going to look over here. Question 2, the best answer is F. F, no change. We're good. An author, lecturer, filmmaker, and a fierce advocate for elephants, which face a daunting array of threats to their survival, from droughts to human encroachment, Moss is widely considered an expert on the social behavior of these creatures. Okay, so this whole thing is an introduction to Moss. An author, lecturer, filmmaker, fierce advocate for elephants. And then there's this clause in here, which facing a daunting array of, you can get rid of this whole thing, right, which face a daunting array of threats to their survival, and we would still be talking about Moss. This is a little flavor text in the middle, which face a daunting array of threats to their survival, from droughts to human encroachment. And it needs a pause after that to indicate that we're referencing back to the beginning of the sentence, an author. So look, you could get rid of all of this and it would still work. An author, Moss is widely considered an expert on the social behavior of these creatures. See, an author, lecturer, filmmaker, and a fierce advocate for elephants, Moss is widely considered an expert on the social behavior of these creatures. So this little phrase here is unnecessary, which means it needs a comma after it. If it's an unnecessary, sort of flavory kind of sentence, it needs a comma after it. So we're going to look over here. This one, oh, actually, so it's either a comma or this M dash. This M dash right here would correspond with this M dash here. So we opened this phrase with an M dash. We should close the phrase with an M dash. That's this dash right here. So I'm going to say B. Let's go look at the answer. Question 3, the best answer is B. Good. Because of the parenthetical information. Remember, so comma would have been a good answer, but it wouldn't have been the best answer. So you got to sort of talk your way through it. See how this phrase, which I was talking about, this specific phrase, which face a daunting array of threats to their survival, from droughts to human encroachment. That phrase starts with a dash so it should end with a dash. Okay, now 4 has this little box, so we're probably going to be talking about the whole paragraph. At this point, the writer is considering adding the following true statement. Humans are among the threats to animal survival. Should the writer make this addition here? So we'll read the whole thing again and see if this sentence makes sense there. Cynthia Moss has been studying elephants since 1972, when she started the now famous Amboseli Elephant Research Project in Amboseli National Park in Kenya. An author, lecturer, filmmaker, and a fierce advocate for elephants, which face a daunting array of threats to their survival, from droughts to human encroachment, Moss is widely considered an expert on the social behavior of these creatures. Okay, so this whole paragraph is about Moss. It's introducing Cynthia Moss. So to jump from that to humans are among the threats to the animal survival, first is kind of jarring. Like, that's a whole different point than what this paragraph is trying to do. Not only that, but look at this. From droughts to human encroachment. We already said something about humans. So let's look at our options. Yes and yes are the first two. I'm leaning towards no, so I'm going to read H and J. No, because the essay is focused on elephants and does not otherwise a mention of human presence. That's not true. It mentions humans right there. No, because this information is already provided in the paragraph. Right there, human encroachment. So I'm going to say J, and I'm going to check the book. Question 4, the best answer is J, because the preceding sentence mentions human encroachment. Okay. So this uses a classic test-taking technique. Boy, that's a weird phrase to say. Where you get rid of 2 of your 4 answers right away. So I determined that this sentence felt awkward, and so the answer was no. So these 2 yeses I got to immediately get rid of and look only between H and J. And that immediately puts my chances of getting it right from 25% to 50%. Right now it's a 50-50 shot because it's just between H and J. That is usually something you could. We did that in number 3 as well, when we put it between the comma and the dash, and we just decided that the dash was better than the comma. That's a classic test-taking technique, is to eliminate 2 of the bad answers. Okay, so let's continue on. A key finding from her intensive field studies is the extent to which elephant survival depends on learned behavior. As Moss has observed, however, a calf must learn how to use its trunk. Oh, that's an awkward move. A key finding from her intensive field studies is the extent to which elephant survival depends on learned behavior. Okay, so let's go from her intensive field studies. You see how I didn't pause at all in reading it? There's 2 commas there, and the commas would force you to pause, and there's no need to pause there. So let's look over and see if there's an option without commas. Intensive field studies, right there, number B. A key finding from our intensive field studies is the extent to which. So I'm going to say B on number 5, and let's look. Best answer is B because no punctuation is needed. The absence of punctuation creates a grammatical, clear, and understandable sentence. The best answer is not these others because of complicated English reasons. I like to just go with the idea that when you're reading it, you don't need to pause. I'm leaving this document up here, this passage 1. If you want to read through and see if that helps you understand it better, please do. For me, they seem to overcomplicate it. Okay, so let's look at 6. As Moss observed, however, a calf must learn how to use its trunk. Okay, so however, as a word, means you're contradicting whatever came before it. So that's the reason it sort of threw me off there, is however is not necessary there. Is learned behavior. So if I look over at these options, no change, I don't want forever, or however. So I'm going to say no change is not the answer. It's going to be one of these 3. As Moss has observed, for instance, a calf must learn how to use its trunk. That makes a lot of sense. As Moss has observed, as always, a calf must learn how to use its trunk. As always doesn't really fit because we're not talking about like habituation. We're not talking about habits. As Moss has observed by now, a calf must learn. So it's between by now and for instance. And since we're not talking about how it took her years to discover this, we're just talking about one example of this first sentence, I'm going to go with for instance. As Moss has observed, for instance, a calf must learn how to use its trunk. At first, a young elephant will drink by kneeling down at the water's edge, and it sipped directly with its mouth. Okay, it sipped is a weird phrase, but it's underlined, so I'm going to ignore it for now. So, as Moss has observed, however, I'm going to replace it with for instance. Let's see if that's right. Number 6. Best answer is G, because the phrase for instance offers the most logical transition from the claim. At first, a young elephant will drink by kneeling down at the water's edge and sipping directly with its mouth. And sipping is an option. See, it said it has to be and sipping because you have kneeling at the beginning. The young elephant will drink by kneeling and sipping. Right? Since it has an ing here, you have to have this next word agree with it. So, sipping. So number 7 should be C. Yes, it is C. Maintains parallelism with the gerund kneeling, avoiding faulty and potentially confusing constructions within the prepositional phrase that begins with by kneeling. Right. So, because, yeah, parallelism, meaning the construction is parallel, meaning they're next to each other, they're similar. Kneeling and sipping. The habit of pulling water into its trunk, then releasing the water into its mouth, develops only after months as if witnessing other elephants doing so. The habit of pulling water into its trunk, then releasing. Okay, so they did period and a capital T and separated in 2 separate sentences when it doesn't need to. So this is number 8. We're going to look at 8. Either no trunk, no change, trunk then by, or trunk. And get rid of then. The habit of pulling water into its trunk, releasing that water, no comma, that's awkward. So I'm going to say no to J. The habit of pulling water into its trunk, then by releasing the water, then by, that by is weird. You don't need that by. The habit of pulling water into its trunk, and then releasing that water into its mouth. G. G sounds really nice. So 8 to G. Best answer is G. We're good. Trunk and then. Because the prepositional phrase starts with of pulling water, pulling and releasing, the phrase trunk and then correctly joins the 2 objects with a conjunction most clearly describes the elephant's habit. Right, so we definitely didn't need to separate it into 2 sentences. Okay, and then releasing the water into its mouth develops only after months of witnessing other elephants doing so. As if witnessing would require a whole different sentence built around it. As if is like a comparative thing, right? You're comparing, you're saying he's doing this thing as if witnessing it would require a whole different sentence. Releasing the water into his mouth develops only after months of witnessing, and that's an option right here, C, of witnessing. So 9 is C. Of witnessing creates a prepositional phrase that most clearly and logically describes what the elephant has been doing for months. Okay. On occasion, Moss will see a calf stick its trunk into the mouth of its mother and pull out a bit of water, whatever plant material she is eating. In this way, the calf learns what kinds of vegetation are safe to eat on the savanna, where poisonous plants also grow. 1. So we're going to be looking at this whole sentence probably. Elephants live in family groups, each one headed by a matriarch. 2. This senior female teaches adolescent females by modeling proper care of younger elephants. 3. One of Moss's most memorable observations in which this regard involved 3 elephants. Okay, so we're going to look at 10. 10 right here. Either no change. Did that sound right? One of Moss's most memorable observations in which this regard. That sounds overly complicated, right? I don't think that we need the in which. So let's look at the options. Let's replace it with the options. One of Moss's most memorable observations in this regard involved 3 elephants. That sounded pretty good. One of Moss's most memorable observations, ones that involved 3 elephants. No, that didn't sound good at all. One of Moss's most memorable observations, which involved 3 elephants. That one sounded pretty good too. So we're going to say it's between G and J. It's between G and J. One of Moss's most memorable observations in this regard. Okay, so in this regard refers back to the sentence before it, right? This is a pronoun, which means it has to refer to some sort of noun. So this regard is a pronoun phrase, which has to be referring to something else. So we look back to the sentence before it. The senior female teaches adolescent females by modeling proper care of younger elephants. Modeling proper care is what this regard is referring to. So modeling proper care and this regard are talking to each other. They have something to do with each other. One of Moss's most memorable observations, which involved 3 elephants, would be the beginning of a sentence and would require a comma after the elephants and another phrase. One of Moss's most memorable observations, which involved 3 elephants, was, you see, that would require a whole other thing. So we're going to go with in this regard. G. Number 10, G. Yep, we're good. In this regard adds a prepositional phrase that creates a clear and complete sentence. Alright, 4. These were a matriarch, Echo, and 2 offspring, Enid, a 10-year-old female, and Eli, also named by Moss. 11, no change. See, okay, here's why there's a problem with this. Also named by Moss would only make sense if we had already pointed out that the other 2 were named by Moss, and we didn't. These were a matriarch, Echo, and 2 offspring, Enid, a 10-year-old female, and Eli, a baby male. See, Eli is a boy's name. If you're not a native English speaker, you might not know that, but Eli is a boy name. And it makes sense with this parallel construction. We know the gender of Echo is a female because she's a matriarch, right? Matriarch means female leader. So these were a matriarch, Echo, and her 2 offspring. Enid, a 10-year-old female. And since Enid is described with her age and gender, we need Eli to be described with his age and gender. So a baby male. So we're going to go with B on 11. 11, best answer is B, because the phrase a baby male is the only choice that adds new and relevant information to the sentence. I like my explanation better. Nanner, nanner. 5. Echo showed Enid how to care for Eli by staying close to him when he was feeding and sleeping and by running to his aid when he signaled his distress. Eli not only overcame his early limitations, but he also grew up to be a confident young bull. Okay, so here's a construction here. Not only when it's at the beginning of a sentence, always requires you to say, but also, which they do right here. But also he grew up. Eli not only overcame his early limitations, but he also grew up to be a confident young bull. I like it. I don't think there needs to be a change, but let's make sure. Let's read through and replace with the other things. Not only overcame his early limitations, but he also will have grown up. No, because we're not talking about the future, we're talking about the past. Early limitations, but he also had grown up to be. Nope, that's the wrong tense. Not only overcame his early limitations, but also growing up to be. Nope, that changes the tense. All three of these change the tense. That's like future perfect, that's past perfect, and since we see from overcame that this is in the simple past tense, we need to leave it in the simple past tense. So 12 is F, no change. Yes, he also grew, avoids an unnecessary tense shift within the sentence. Very good. Okay, so this is where it accidentally jumped, and I got to go over here for 13. Here we go. Eli was born with deformed feet that initially prevented him from walking. For the sake of logic and cohesion, the best place for sentence 7 would be, alright, so this was a bit of, here it says he overcame his early limitations, right? But none of these sentences introduced him having limitations. So it's got to come before sentence 6. Where could it go? Eli's not introduced until sentence 4. Right here. So Enid, a 10-year-old female, and Eli, a baby male. Echo showed Enid how to care for Eli by staying close to him. Let's see here. Eli was born with deformed feet that initially prevented him from walking. Echo showed Enid how to care for Eli by staying close to him when he was feeding. I think it should go before sentence 5. So we would read, these were a matriarch Echo and her 2 offspring, Enid, a 10-year-old female, and Eli, a baby male. Eli was born with deformed feet that initially prevented him from walking. Echo showed Enid how to care for Eli by staying close to him when he was feeding and sleeping and by running to his aid when he signaled his distress. Eli not only overcame his early limitations, but he also grew up to be a confident young bull. So I'm going to say before 5. Where it is now, before sentence 1, after sentence 3, after sentence 4, yes, which would put it before sentence 5, so that's D. Question 13, the best answer is D, because this place makes it clear why Echo needed to take special care of Eli and why Eli might signal distress. Very good. Okay. Moss has brought compelling stories and information about elephants is provided to an ever-expanding audience. That is awkward. She hopes others will in turn become advocates for the animal she admires and understands in ways few others do. Okay. Moss has brought compelling stories and information about elephants is given by her to an ever-expanding audience. No. Moss has brought compelling stories and information about elephants is reaching an ever... No. Has brought compelling stories and information about elephants to an ever-expanding audience. Bam. J. 14 is J. Because all that is needed to complete the main clause is a 2. Back here. Okay. Question 15 asks about the preceding passage as a whole. Suppose the writer's goal had been to write a brief essay focusing on some aspect of animal behavior in the wild. Would this essay accomplish that goal? The writer's goal has been to write a brief essay focusing on some aspect of animal behavior in the wild. Would this essay accomplish that goal? Yes, because the essay focuses on Moss's research on how elephants of the savannah learn to identify their various family members. No, that was not mentioned at all. Yes, because the essay focuses on elephants on the savannah and some of the behaviors display as studied by Moss. Maybe. No, because the essay focuses instead on how elephants have evolved in Kenya as compared to how they have evolved in other parts of Africa. No, that evolution wasn't mentioned at all. D, no, because the essay focuses on elephants that Moss studies in zoos around the world. No, she was talking about wild elephants, right? Field studies. That means out in the savannah. That's, yeah. So yes, because the essay focuses on elephants in the savannah and some of the behaviors they display. B. 15, B. Okay. So that was the guide to getting every question right of the first 15 questions. I'm going to post a brief questionnaire for evidence that you watched this video. And have a good day.